Wild card weekend is here. That means it's playoff football time. Just because your fantasy season is over doesn't mean you can't keep playing. I'm Jen Piacenti with Sports Illustrated, and I don't know about you guys, but I've got some fantasy playoff leagues. I'm throwing in some DFS lineups, so to give us all the best start-sit advice, I'm bringing in Michael Fabiano, Sports Illustrated's senior fantasy analyst. Fabs, how many playoff leagues are you in?
I'm going to be in a couple. I try to limit it. I mean, I played in 14 fantasy leagues during the regular season. I need a break. So I'll play in a couple, including one that I'm going to be running on SiriusXM.
Well, I think I'm in 4, and I'll be putting in DFS lineups every week. So these start-sit, recommendations are still very important to me. Let's start with the quarterback position. Who is in our lineups this weekend?
And it's really weird for me to talk about some of these players because I never talk about, the big stars, the obvious guys as stardoms, but I don't have that many options, Jen, so I'm going to go with Tom Brady here. The matchup on paper is not great against Philadelphia. He has no Chris Godwin. We know Antonio Brown is no longer with the team, but I still love Tom Brady. Why? Because he's the GOAT. I mean, listen, this guy threw for over 5,000 yards and over 40 touchdowns, and he's 44 years old, right? The Eagles defense has allowed 19-plus fantasy points to quarterbacks 9 times this season. They've also allowed the 9th most fantasy points to quarterbacks in the last 9 games. So start Tom Brady, even though the matchup on paper is not tremendous. And then I'm also going to go with Matthew Stafford. And let's be honest, he did not finish the season off well. I mean, look at the interceptions. 7 picks, failed to score more than 17.5 fantasy points in his last 3 games. But he's got the Cardinals this week, and their defense since week 9 has allowed 19 touchdown passes and the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. I also like Dak Prescott this week. How about them Cowboys? And if you're looking for a DFS play, Matthew Stafford's only $6,300.
I love the Matt Stafford call. Yeah, the Arizona defense has actually surrendered the most of all the playoff defenses to opposing quarterbacks across the past 4 contests. I agree with that 100%. I love the value. And Tom Brady, if you're in one of those playoff leagues where, once the player plays, they're out, I love the choice of Tom Brady because I think you're going to get multiple weeks, and he's not sitting for a bye week as would, say, Ryan Tannehill or Aaron Rodgers. So I think you get more games. Love it, love it. Who should I sit this weekend?
Ben Roethlisberger, and I get it. He led the Steelers to the playoffs, and I'm glad that he's got one more game in his illustrious career, but it's not going to end well. I mean, let's put it that way. The Chiefs' defense has been very tough on quarterbacks lately. In fact, in Week 16, they held Roethlisberger to 6.4 fantasy points. I keep Big Ben on the bench. And you mentioned there are leagues out there that are elimination leagues where you can only play a player once. I would not play Roethlisberger even in those leagues. And the same thing with Mac Jones, right? I mean, he was the best rookie quarterback in fantasy football, but he wasn't really consistent. And he was also really bad against the Bills, right? 5.6 fantasy points in 2 games combined. Now, remember, one of those games he threw 3 passes. But the weather in Buffalo is supposed to be around 0 during this game. It's a Saturday night game. So it's going to be cold in Buffalo. Maybe the Patriots are going to run the ball a lot in that game. So Mac Jones is a fade for me. Same thing with Derek Carr. And a player that I would avoid in DFS, Jalen Hurts against the Buccaneers at $6,100.
Absolutely. The Philadelphia Eagles haven't won a single game versus a team with a winning record, so I don't like their chances this weekend versus the Bucs. Let's jump over to the running back position. Now, when I look at the running backs that are in the playoffs, none of them are particularly exciting. I mean, none of these really come from, like Dalvin Cook isn't there. A lot of those stud guys we think of, Nick Chubb, is not there. So there's less of an exciting pool. But who should I get excited about this weekend?
Yeah, this is weird because I've never had Joe Mixon in a stardom sit-em video because he's been too obvious. He's been very good, but we don't have that many options. So I'm going to go with Joe Mixon here against the Raiders. Now, he's activated off the COVID-19 list earlier in the week. A really good matchup against the Silver and Black. They've allowed 14 total touchdowns and the 4th most fantasy points to running back since week 9. And overall, they've given up 14-plus fantasy points to running back 16 times. So Joe Mixon is in a really good spot. And then I'm going to start Elijah Mitchell against our beloved Dallas Cowboys. All right, he scored 17-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games, and he really is the bell cow there for Kyle Shanahan. The Cowboys have allowed at least 13.2 fantasy points per game to a running back in each of the last 3, including 18.7 to Kenneth Gainwell in the finale. The Cowboys defense can be tough on running backs, but Shanahan's offense very conducive to running backs scoring fantasy points. I'm going to start Mitchell here. I think he's going to get a lot of touches in this game as the Niners try to run the ball against Dallas. I'd also go with Josh Jacobs in a good matchup against the Bengals and Sony Michel against the Cardinals. My DFS bargains, Devin Singletary at $5,700 is a very good play. And then Sony Michel against the Cardinals at $5,400. I like that play as well.
Yeah, I can't believe Sony Michel continues to be such a bargain. But hey, take it while you can. Now, as far as sitting running backs, you're sitting one of our beloved Dallas Cowboys, Fabs.
Right, and he's been a sit-em often over the last month or so, including in the regular season finale where he had 10 points. And it's not that good. It's Ezekiel Elliott, right? I mean, overall, he had 10 or fewer points in 4 of his last 6 games. During that time, he scored single digits 3 times. That's not good. And the Niners defense has allowed one running back to score more than 13.9 fantasy points against them in their last 4 games. You're going to see a lot of Tony Pollard. I think the Cowboys are going to utilize Dak Prescott and the air attack rather than try to attack the Niners with Ezekiel Elliott. So he's a fade for me. And then Miles Sanders is also a fade. He's going to come back this week, right? Missed last week's game, but he'll be back. But so will Jordan Howard. Boston Scott will be in the mix as well. And the Buccaneers, I mean, they've allowed the 4th fewest rushing yards to opposing running backs in their last 9 games. So the matchup is not great. And if the Buccaneers get ahead in this game, well, then the Eagles could be running the ball a lot less in the second half. So I would fade Sanders. Chase Edmonds, Ramondre Stevenson also fades for me. James Conner is a $6,300 fade in DFS and Zeke at $6,100. But keep tabs on the health of the Cardinals' backfield going into this weekend.
Let's head over to the wide receiver position. Tom Brady is short a lot of weapons, but there's one guy in particular we know he loves to target in the red zone.
Right, and that's Mike Evans. And the last time Evans played against the Eagles, he had a stinker. I mean, he didn't do anything. 4.7 fantasy points, but keep in mind, Antonio Brown was still on the team, and he actually scored over 24 points in that game, and they had Chris Godwin. Now, a lot of these targets are getting funneled to Evans, right? And we've seen that over the last couple of games. 41.6 combined fantasy points. He'll see plenty of targets. The matchup's not great, but I'm still going to play Mike Evans. And then T. Higgins, you got to play him. 16-plus fantasy points in 4 of his final 6 regular season games, including 3 games with more than 23 fantasy points. He already had a huge game with over 40 as well. The Raiders have surrendered 7 touchdowns and the 7th most fantasy points to opposing receivers lined out wide in their last 10 games. So I like T. Higgins in this one. Of course, Jamar Chase is an obvious play. I'm also starting Hunter Renfrow, Odell Beckham Jr. If you're looking for DFS bargains, Christian Kirk is only at $5,300 against the Rams, and OBJ is only $5,100 against the Cardinals.
Ooh, I love both those calls. All right, for sitting, who are we sitting this weekend in their wildcard games?
These are somewhat obvious plays, but Chase Claypool, he had a good regular season finale with 18 points. It didn't help you because that was most fantasy leagues were already over at this point. But he had failed to score more than 8.1 fantasy points in 4 of his 5 previous games, and he's got the Chiefs this week. They just played the Chiefs in Week 16, and Chase Claypool had 4 catches for 41 yards. It was not good. Kansas City's also given up just 6 touchdowns to receivers lined out wide in their last 9 games. So Claypool is a fade for me. I think the Steelers' offense is going to struggle. And then I'm also going to fade Jakobi Meyers. Now, he finished with 11-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. Not bad, right? But this is a bad matchup on the road against Buffalo. Keep in mind, it's going to be really cold there in Buffalo. Again, the temperature could be around 0. And their defense has been really tough against wide receivers since Week 9, allowing 4 touchdowns and the 2nd fewest fantasy points to the position. They've also allowed the fewest fantasy points to receivers lined out wide in that time. I'd also beware Brandon Ayuk and Cole Beasley this week. In terms of DFS fades, Devontae Smith at $5,500 is a fade, and so is Ayuk against the Cowboys at $5,400.
You know, you're mentioning of Chase Claypool. I'm just still in denial that we're getting Big Ben and Chase Claypool in postseason instead of Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen. But anyway, football gods, this is what they gave us. So
was not call the timeout. I'm convinced.
Yeah, it was just, it's a crazy thing, but this is why you have to play all the games, and man, was Week 18 exciting. I'm so hopeful for Wildcard Weekend to be equally as exciting. Let's finish up with a really exciting position. I'm using reverse psychology here. The tight end. I'm sure they're going to be huge for us this weekend. Who have you got for us?
We're going to go with Rob Gronkowski. He scored a combined 39.2 fantasy points in his last 2 games. You know, the last regular season finale there, he hit all these incentives, over $1 million. Hey, Gronk, I mean, I could, take a little bit of that too if you want. I'm sure you got plenty of cash already. But the matchup this week is very good against Philadelphia. No team in the NFL has allowed more touchdowns or fantasy points at tight ends. So Gronkowski, of course, without AB, without Chris Godwin, should continue to see a lot of targets from Tom Brady. And in that same game, I like Dallas Goedert. He scored 13-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games, including 2 games with over 20 points. He's been very good from a fantasy perspective. He's got the Buccaneers this week. They've allowed 6 touchdowns and an average of nearly 13 fantasy points per game to tight ends. I think Goedert will be targeted a lot in this game. And if the Eagles have to throw the ball in the second half to try and eliminate a deficit, Goedert should be the beneficiary of a lot of those Jalen Hurts passes. So start Goedert this week. I also like Dalton Schultz against the 49ers. And Goddard's only $4,500 on DraftKings. I like that value this weekend.
I like the Dalton Schultz call. You know, he actually finished the season as the number 2 target for Dak Prescott. And this was a guy that was available on waiver wires in 90% of leagues by week 3. So that was a really nice surprise. And with no Michael Gallup, I think that's a really good call and a really good value for DFS as well. Now, you got yet another Pittsburgh Steeler on your sit list for tight ends.
Yeah, I'm just not feeling this offense against Kansas City in a road game. Arrowhead's a very loud stadium. That's going to be a raucous crowd. And Pat Freiermuth, I mean, listen, he'll end up being like a breakout candidate next year, depending on who the quarterback is in Pittsburgh. And he's been very good overall, right? But lately, 7.7 or fewer fantasy points in 3 of his last 5 games, during which time he's only scored once. And the Chiefs have been really tough on tight ends this year. They've allowed no touchdowns and the 3rd fewest fantasy points to the position in their last 9 games. So I'm fading Pat Freiermuth, and I'm also fading Hunter Henry. He's been very good as well overall, right? I mean, he was a top 12 tight end, but he was very inconsistent, right? He scored 13.6 fantasy points in the finale for the Patriots, but he also had been held to single-digit points in 7 of his previous 9 games. He's very touchdown dependent. 2 of those games came against the Bills, and he scored, Jen, a combined 1.9 fantasy points in 2 games against Buffalo during the course of the regular season. Buffalo's defense is very tough on tight ends, so Hunter Henry is going to be on my bench. Same thing with Tyler Higbee. And then Dawson Knox is a fade for me at $4,800 against the Patriots. Their defense also very tough against the tight end position.
You know, we need the kind of faith in the New England Patriots that Julian Edelman has. He actually put a wager down, $100,000, that the Bucks and the Patriots would meet in the Super Bowl. He was capped at, like $500,000 that he can win. But if you did that at home, your parlay would actually be worth about $4 million. Not recommending it, just saying I want someone that loves me as much as Julian Edelman loves the Patriots and Tom Brady. That would be a great world for me to live in. If you guys are interested in all of our start-sit information, guess what? All you have to do is hit that subscribe button right here, because we're going to be back every week through the playoffs all the way to the Super Bowl with more great info for you on how to win your DFS and playoff leagues. And of course, you can always find us at si.com/fantasy.